Okay, so Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Now I'm going to get to some really blunt analysis. The caveat, which I'm going to have to say 5 times as the people walk in, is the following. I am being descriptive and not prescriptive. I am describing and not judging. I'm being factual. There is no sense of criticism. I am literally laying it out for you in a manner that, frankly, unfortunately, hardly anybody does, but they need to do it because everybody's scared about what others are going to say, and because of this, everybody remains confused. So I'm going to speak to you in a manner that is probably too blunt for my own good. May Allah protect me. But the goal is not my ego. The goal is to benefit you. The goal is so that you understand what's going on. Okay? So once again, what's my caveat? What's it? I'm being descriptive, not prescriptive. I'm just telling it like it is. I'm not making a judgment right now. After maybe 15, 20 minutes or whenever I'm done, I will tell you my 2 cents, take it or leave it. Fair? Everybody understand? Okay? Okay. Now, when it comes to modern fiqh movements, one can easily say there is a spectrum of positions about how one derives fiqh. And this spectrum starts from one far left and it goes all to the far right, or let's flip it around. Starts with far right and goes all the way to the far left. And one can have milestones, markers, to kind of sort of give variations. And obviously it's not like hard cut, it's just, overall philosophies. So, to be super simplistic, one could divide this spectrum into 5 categories, okay? And this is where I'm going to get a little bit controversial, sorry. One could divide how one views fiqh and the scholars of fiqh and the movements of fiqh into one of 5 categories. Remember, it's a spectrum. Starts over here, works its way all the way over there. And obviously, as with all things with spectrums, there's vagueness. It's not as if it's like hard cut line where one begins and the other ends. It's just like a continuum, like exactly a spectrum on the rainbow, right? So on the far right, one has a whole series of movements and scholars that we can say are madhabists. Madhabists. By madhabist we mean they are advocating sticking to a madhab. Choose a madhab and stick with it. And this is the historical default for the last 1,000 years. This is the majority and dominant opinion. And under this, one finds an entire spectrum of movements and ulama. I am in which city? It has one of the most main manifestations of this movement, okay? I'm being factual. What did I say? There's no judgment. I'm being factual. This is exactly as it is, okay? You follow a madhab and you stick with a madhab through thick and through thin. There is no divorce. I mean, for the madhab, obviously. This marriage is for life. There is no exit. And whatever is the pros and cons, the positives and negatives, the ups and downs, you will go to the sheikh of that particular madhab and you will ask and you will follow. And their reasoning is very, very simple. And that is, number 1, it's the way it's always been done. And number 2, there's a level of consistency. We like you to be consistent. We don't want you to pick and choose when you're not qualified to pick and choose. Because when you, from their perspective, change this door, when you open this door, it's a slippery slope to go from the far right all the way to the far left, which we're going to come to now, okay? Again, realize, okay, another point. Everybody at every single point of the spectrum looks to those on the right, says, those guys are too fanatical. And looks to the one on the left, says, they're too liberal. That is also a reality. In this entire spectrum, and there are people more right to them, for example, which again, I don't need to get into, for now I'm being introductory level. So the madhabist movements, and this is the majority of the pre-modern ummah, and the majority of the mainstream strands of Islam, whether they're in Egypt or in India or in Timbuktu or in Malaysia, wherever they might be, the historical default has been sympathetic to the paradigm of madhab-centered fiqh. And as I said, they reason that every one of these madhabs has a history, a trajectory. It has a school. It has thousands and thousands of scholars that have built an entire manifest, structure. An entire superstructure has been built over the last 12 centuries. Why would you come along and try to start all over again? Why reinvent the wheel? So far, so clear? Okay, these are the madhabist movements. And for them, they have their fiqh councils as well. They have the Hanafi fiqh council, the Shafi'i fiqh council, the Maliki, they have whatnot, and they will, try to derive fiqh based upon their madhab. And by and large, there is a strict hierarchy depending on the school and the geography of where you happen to come from. So the madhabs of, I don't want to get too explicit, but anyway, you get the point. Geography and fiqh both play a role. Ethnicity also plays a role. So there's a hierarchy. We will go to the top of those people, the akabir, whoever they might be, and we will trickle it down. This is on the far right, the madhab based. Moving slightly to the left here, from my left here, right? Moving slightly to the left here, you will get those that are called dalil based. Not madhab based, dalil based, evidence based. An evidence based fiqh is fiqh that doesn't care about the four schools. It cares about what it views to be the strongest evidence. Put that in, obviously, quotation marks. What is the strongest evidence? And of course, generally speaking, I'm being very factual. There is no pejorative, no derogatory. I'm literally teaching you. This is, in our times, the main manifestation is what is called the Salafi movement. Okay? This is evidence-based fiqh, dalil fiqh. We don't care about the 4 madhabs or the 5 madhabs or the 10 madhabs. What does the dalil say? And we're going to look at the evidences from the Quran and Sunnah, regardless of who said what, and we're going to try to find which evidence is the strongest and then extrapolate it to modernity. Now, both madhab-based and dalil-based, pay attention to this, this is very important. Both madhab-based and dalil-based look backwards. What do I mean by look backwards? They look to the past. And there is minimal, although not complete, minimal involvement with the present. In fact, for both of these strands, the majority of questions you ask them, if you were to lock them in a room, provide them food and water, give them the books they ask you, pause here, the books they are going to have are going to be slightly different. There's going to be some overlap, but there's going to be slight differences in which books they want. If you were to give them all of their encyclopedic books, within an hour or 2 days or 2 weeks, they're going to come out and give you their answer. They look backwards, precedents. Both madhab-based and dalil-based are, generally speaking, traditionalist. Generally speaking, conforming with past precedents. It's almost impossible for them to break away from past precedent. Because from their perspective, you open up the slippery slope, the can of worms. If we allow an inch, you're going to take a mile. And the madhabis say this to the dalil base say this to the ones left to them. They say, and as I said, it's a continuum. It's like driving on the highway. Anybody that overtakes you is going too fast. And anybody that's too slow is some person driving that doesn't know how to drive. And you, mashallah, tabarakallah, become the standard by which everybody else should be judged. That's exactly what happens on this continuum as well, okay? Literally, I'm just being factual. There's no judgment. It's literally what happens. So, now, the first group was which group? You're not taking notes this one. The first group was which group? Madhab-based. The second group is dalil-based, okay? Now, I'm going to pause here and flip to the other side and work my way back in. Clear? I'm going to pause here, flip to the other side. On the exact other side, far left, I did 1 and 2, skip 3 and 4, jump to 5 for now, because now I'm going to work my way back in. The 5th category of people, the far left, are exactly the far left. And they call themselves the progressives. And the progressives have nothing to do with the past. They are only concerned with what? The present, the context. They're only concerned with the current fads and trends. And they're not bothered by precedents. Who cares if everybody interpreted it that way? We live in a different time and place, and Allah meant this religion for all times and places, and Allah gave us a brain to think. And some might even say the Quran wasn't meant to be applied literally in every single context. It was fine for its time and place, but we have the right to, because Allah told us, تَتَفَكَّرُونَ تَعْقِلُونَ تَذَكَّرُونَ, and they have their, mechanisms of doing that. And they're more than happy to boldly tell you, we don't care about precedents. Everybody before us was, whatever it might be, misogynistic, homophobic, whatever. We have the right to rethink through. And of course, a simple litmus test is LGBT, for example, right? There are people out there who are running masajid, quote unquote they call it, in which nikah takes place between the same gender. I'm just telling you a fact. And there are fatwas that legitimize this. And there are dissertations written, an entire dissertation written 10 years ago, here in this country, by somebody who professes to be Muslim, in which he attempts to prove that the Quran sanctions, for example, such unions. And he quite literally says, and I have given lectures and written articles about this, he quite literally says that if fiqh is not going to make room for us, because he identifies as one of those, if fiqh is not going to make room for us, we will discard fiqh and create our own. There's no problem. I mean, there's a bluntness that is quite easy in this regard. They're telling you exactly what they believe. We don't care if everybody said something. We have the right to renegotiate everything. Literally everything. And where there's a will, there's a way. And whoever wants to play a willy-nilly hermeneutics game can do so if they don't subscribe to a recognized school. Believe me, they can. And they have done this for the LGBT issue in a very simple manner. I don't want to confuse you all, but there is a PhD written on this, literally, and multiple groups as well. And I've interacted with them, and I know their arguments, and I find them very weak, but they don't care if I find them weak. They have people that have justified, and for them, this is completely fair. It's just one example. If they're going to allow this, then of course the sky's the limit. Everything, literally, there is nothing that is sacrosanct. Nothing. Don't want to get into trouble here by mentioning other fatwas they have. Or is this being recorded? Everybody here is gonna. But it is being recorded, right? Yeah. Oh, okay. I have enough refutations as it is. I'm going to add to those as this one. Okay. I mean, they have bizarre fatwas. Let me not say that one. Let me just say another one. This group, and by the way, they call themselves progressives. I'm not the one calling them progressives. They call themselves progressive Muslims, right? This is, you've seen the videos of the salahs that the genders are mixed around, okay? So the female leads, the salah, okay? And mashallah, they follow the sunnah, head to head, shoulder to shoulder, mashallah, mashallah. So yeah, that was a joke, obviously, if you didn't get that right. Okay, one of their fatwas is, where do I even begin? Okay, a simple one. Woman in her menses should pray the salah. Why? Because when the Quran was, wallahi, I'm not joking. Wallahi, I'm not joking. There were no menstrual pads when the Quran was revealed. QED, evidence given, khalas. Quran and Sunnah refuted. Our brothers are wondering what I'm talking about, I think. But khair, okay. Go talk to other people and find out. But yeah, literally they said because there were no menstrual pads, that's why Allah forbade. Now that we can buy tampons, khalas, we don't have to follow the ijma' and the Quran and the Sunnah, literally. Now you can't really argue with that type of argumentation. Why? Because their hermeneutics are unrecognizable to the rest of the ummah. Is that clear? Now here I said I'm not going to make a judgment call. For category 5 I do. Because it's not even judgment cause factual. I mean, it's just like, you can't really interact with somebody who has no similarity and commonality with you. Wallahi, there is no fiqh with these people, but they do exist. And they are predominant in small pockets here and there, and they are who they are. So that's category 5, okay? Category 4, the term is difficult to use, or I don't know what to call them. I used the term modernist once, but then somebody had a long discussion with me and I kind of agree with that. So Neo-Mu'tazilite, Quranists, I don't know what to call them. But category 4 is one category, closer to the middle and not as far as them. And this category consists of, from the beginning of time, by the way, from the beginning of time, we've had kind of sort of people in this whole spectrum. It's nothing new, conceptual-wise. Category 4 are those who do clearly respect the Quran, and they want to understand the Quran, but by and large, they don't really follow the Sunnah, and they don't follow established usul al-fiqh. Right? So there is, in my humble opinion, a clear divide between category 5 and category 4. Okay? Now, I'm just being factual here. Wallahi, there's no judgment. I'm just being factual here. So just trying to explain to you who these types of people are. For example, in the Arab world, there's a very famous preacher in Belgium, I think, who is very popular online. In the Urdu-speaking world, there's a very famous person living in Dallas as well, very popular online as well. You get the point. These types of people, you listen to them, it's clear they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's clear they want to follow the Quran. But by and large, they're skeptical of Sunnah. And by and large, they are not interested in classical epistemologies of usul al-fiqh. They view it as a derived science. And they say, yeah, it was good for them, but for us, the Quran is binding. And so, generally speaking, I mean, for example, LGBT is a litmus test here. The Quran is very clear. You're not going to find these people sanctioning it, because the Quran is very clear, But they might have interpretations that are not normative when it comes to other issues of fiqh, whether it's hijab, for example, or other things which are not there's a little bit of ambiguity, for example, right? So this is category 4. I don't have a term for them per se. They don't have established schools, but they are independent thinkers. Mufakkirin. They have their understandings, and their fatwa are clearly, some of them are normative and some of them are completely left field, because they're not interested in it in the past. They want the Quran and the context to be merged together. And they're not interested in precedents. They don't care about precedents that much. And they are willing to rethink what the Quran means for our time and place. And such people, they don't have a unified methodology. However, they are becoming more and more popular in every single society and culture because, why that is the case is a subjective opinion, but that's my opinion, that they are a way out. Rather than leave the faith, you can remain in the faith, be faithful to Allah Azza wa Jalla, be faithful to the Quran, and fiqh becomes very malleable. There's a lot more leeway. Now within this you have a whole spectrum, but anyway, so that's whatever you want to call it. I used to call them modernists, but I don't know if that's the right term. But Quranist is maybe a better term. Okay, Quran-centric fiqh. And generally speaking, such people do not have, nor do they intend to have, detailed fatwa of fiqh, because law becomes more about ethics than the minutiae. Because how much does the Quran really have in the end? Law becomes more about the philosophy of law than the minutiae of law. They don't think the Sharia came for these small things. And they find a bit of pettiness in the rest of fiqh. And they'll tell you this. Like Allah we should not be concerned about this. It's the bigger issues, for example. And you understand that rhetoric is very popular because generally speaking, such people are highly educated in the fields they find themselves in. Generally speaking, they're self-taught. Generally speaking, they speak in a discourse that is highly intellectual and is appealing to those of a similar background. And they're one-man shows. Everyone is a one-man show. And they're going to have to be one-man shows because there's nothing that combines all of them. Am I clear? Yeah. Okay? So? Okay, khalas. Now we get to what's left. Number 3. Of course, I saved the best for the last because you're going to hear my inner judgment without actually judgment, okay? I'm gonna not be descriptive, I'm gonna try to be, not be prescriptive, try to be descriptive, but still, when I use the adjectives, automatically you'll know where I stand here. And that's why I save the best for the last. The best for the last is not descriptive, it is prescriptive. Okay. The middle category are those who have called themselves wasati. Wasati. And the term was first coined by Shaykh Qardawi, Allah yarhamu. And the concept or the philosophy predates him, obviously. Again, as I said, you will find thinkers in all of these fields for the last 1,000 years. Nothing new. It's just how it's manifested changes from time to place. The wasati paradigm is beyond the Salafi and before the Quranist. The wasati paradigm is recognizably Sunni. The wasati paradigm respects the Quran and Sunnah. The wasati paradigm does have an overall systematic usul. You can understand and talk and see where they're coming from. So what's the difference? The wasati paradigm, if you ask them a question, they will not just walk into a room and shut the door and go back into the books. No. They will say, fiqh is not derived in a vacuum. They will say, fiqh needs to be context-based and not just text-based. They will say, every fatwa that we give, we need to look at the impact it's going to have and find one along with the classical tradition, weigh the pros and cons of the impact of this fatwa on the people we're giving the fatwa to. So the fatwa is context-based. And they are in agreement with the dalil-based crew that we're not sticking to one madhab. But they disagree that we can break away from all of the classical if the situation allows, and come forth with an opinion that maybe is unprecedented as long as the Sharia allows it. I.e., if there's so what is their red line? It would be ijma' or unanimous consensus. Where there's unanimous consensus of all the madahib and scholars, they will say this is a red line, we cannot cross it. We must respect the tradition. But if they find a minority opinion, and there is like a majority that is opposition to it, they don't mind resurrecting a minority opinion. And say, hey look, it's there. It's nothing new. You find it in the past. There's no ijma' on this issue. And given the time and situation we find ourselves in, actually this fatwa is conducive for the betterment of the ummah. And the Quran and the Sunnah, the Sharia, is not definitive in the majority opinion. It's grey. So we feel this minority opinion is better for the flourishing of the ummah. And that's the fatwa we're going to give. Now, Shaykh Qardawi is of course the dawn or the icon of this field. But obviously he represents a school. He represents a philosophy. He represents an entire paradigm. And throughout his life, and of course I gave a whole lecture when he passed away, you can find it online. The day he passed away, I gave a lecture about the life and times and legacy of Shaykh Qadhi, and I said in that lecture, you should be aware that not only have I met him and read his books, but I do consider him to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest faqih of our time. I'm giving you this bias so that you know I'm a biased individual. All of us are biased. You do understand, people in the first and second paradigm do not believe this. I know because I used to be one of them 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was in the second paradigm. I know. And I know what our own teachers felt about this. Awkward reluctance. Like, yeah, okay, he's a person who has an opinion, but yeah, we have our own akabir that we listen to. And that's fine. Again, I'm trying to empower you with practical knowledge to understand who you should be looking at and why you should be looking at them. Now, to give you some simplistic examples. Simplistic examples. One of the examples that is based on one of the madhabs, again factual, I'm not making any judgment here, but you understand it is something that I don't agree with, but it is factual, is their insistence that the Jumu'ah khutbah be given only in Arabic. The madhab says it must be in Arabic. And so we will persist. In North America, 99% of the people do not speak Arabic, it doesn't matter. It is clear in our madhab, the khutbah is in Arabic. What do we do though? Okay, so we'll give a bayan before the khutbah, in which 10% will come, we'll explain to them, and then the actual khutbah, the khatib is going to read from a prepared, list of khutbahs. He doesn't even know what he's saying sometimes. Just read it out, 2 minutes, done, and that's it. The khutbah is done. If the madhab says this, we're not going to change the madhab. That's their madhab-based thing. Another more controversial, which you're all aware of, is the moon sighting issue. And again, I'm literally using this as an example, not to get into the details of it. The moon sighting issue is a classic manifestation of group 1, group 2, group 3. Very classic. Group 1 will follow its madhab. And some of them literally say, forget calculation, you must visually see the moon. You can't even use a telescope. And one madhab says you cannot even climb on a mountain or a hill. It must be seen from the level that your house is at, for example, or a rooftop or whatever. That's it, nothing more than that. Why? Because the madhab says so. Obviously, the Quran and Sunnah does not preach to what level. Obviously, we all understand the madhab is extrapolating, right? But if there is no calculation of madhab, so whether it's local or whether it's regional, are we going to accept this or are we going to accept that? This is madhab based. Dalil based comes along, and dalil based, the problem with dalil based is whose interpretation of the dalil. Because dalil based sounds cool as a slogan, which is why a 20-year-old would love to jump onto that bandwagon for a few years. But when you study in detail, you realize it's a bit of a facade. It's a bit of a illusory reality. That dalil based according to who? It's a circular argument here. Whose interpretation of the dalil? Going back to the hadith of the Banu Qurayza, which group is following the dalil? Both of them are. That's the problem. Dalil based sounds good as a slogan, and it works if you don't have any knowledge of fiqh. But if you do, you enter into a circularity. And that circularity is, who will you trust the most? And that goes back to group 1 as well. Well, you might as well trust our cabinet as well. So they, generally speaking, their trend said it's going to be a global sighting, because our big scholar Amdan said global sighting according to his interpretation of the dalil. So khalas, we'll go with that. Qardawi comes along, the Fiqh Council of Europe comes along, the Fiqh Council of North America, which I humbly and without any exaggeration say was, I don't know what they were thinking, they appointed me the chair. I don't feel myself qualified to be the chair, but they insisted, so I'm the chair of the current Fiqh Council of North America. And these are all following the Wasati paradigm. The Fiqh Council of Europe and the Fiqh Council of North America are similar in their philosophies, which is the third paradigm. The Fiqh Council of North America came along, how many years ago? This was like literally 20 years ago. 20 years ago, some of you elders remember in the audience, I was still in Medina when they said this fatwa. And at that stage, I was phase 2. And I critiqued the fatwa as a student in Medina. I critiqued it. I said that there's no dalil for this. There's no evidence. But the Fiqh Council has a different philosophy of fiqh. And the Fiqh Council says, well, there's no evidence for visual either. You're just following your books. The Quran and Sunnah doesn't tell you explicitly what to do. You are interpreting. And given the realities of the North American context, and the goal of the Sharia is not visually or to telescope. The goal of the Sharia is, without a doubt, maximizing Eid attendance. That's explicit in the Sunnah. That's explicit in the Sunnah. And even in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jalla explicitly says, let them all come and do takbir. وَلِيُكَبِّرُ اللَّهَ عَلَى مَا هَدَاكُمْ. The explicit goal of the Sharia is maximizing Eid attendance. And as for when you figure out, this is the means to the goal, not the goal. So given our situation here in North America, and given that there is an interpretation of Fulan, Abdullah ibn al-Shakhir, Al-Izz ibn Salam, Sakhawi, others, and I have a whole 2 lectures online for the academics to listen to it. It's not unprecedented. Calculations, you have precedents. And given that so many ulama are now saying this, there's a Fiqh Council of Turkey, there's the European Fiqh Council, there's a council in Kuwait, there's a council here, the Fiqh Council of North America, they're not coming out of thin air. You do find an opinion that says, the context says, it is far more sensible and logical that we announce Eid days in advance. We book one hall, no fighting 11 o'clock at night, midnight. Do we accept this sighting? Do we accept that sighting? The fitna within the communities, the waste of time and resources, the division, we know what it is. Let's get rid of all of that and let's come together, because we all know this is going to be the day of Eid. We can take off, people that have jobs can take off, schools can have public holidays, and we will maximize Eid attendance. This is wasati fiqh. Text and context. Bring it together. Okay? Another example. Again, this is highly controversial. Highly controversial because, again, this is what wasati fiqh does. It looks at the reality. Another example of wasati fiqh. living in a non-Muslim land. Conversion of one of the two spouses and not the other. Now, if the husband converts to Islam and the wife remains Catholic or Jewish or whatnot, then of course there's a huge leeway because the Quran allows Ahl Kitab. Pause your footnote. In my own humble opinion, I do not think it is permissible to begin a marriage between a Christian and a Muslim in any circumstance of the genders, and I have my reasonings for this. It's not a matter of strictness or not every strict fatwa, not every liberal fatwa is correct or incorrect. In my humble opinion, of the goals of the Sharia is to protect the children of the marriage. And given the context we live in, marrying outside the faith is one of the biggest factors that will cause the children to leave Islam, especially if a divorce takes place. So the personal position I hold, it's my personal opinion, it's a minority opinion. It is not allowed to begin a nikah contract outside of Islam in Dar al-Kufr. Beginning a marriage contract between a Muslim man and a Kitabi lady is only allowed in Dar al-Islam. And this is the position of Ibn Abbas. Umar al-Khattab made it a policy in his era. It is what I publicly say multiple times. Now, this is my opinion. If somebody says, oh, Shaykh, how can you say this one? I say, it's an opinion, Yaqeen. Chill, it's okay. You can have two opinions and still live, I don't become a kafir if I disagree with your Shaykh. It's okay. It's you have to breathe, live and let live, no problem. But in my opinion, it should not be done, and I never encourage it, and I've never done such a nikah. I would not do that because I don't agree with this. It should not be done. But that's ibtida, and that's when you begin. How about you didn't begin? You're two Christians, two Jews, two whatever. One of them converts. If the man converts, as we said, it's no problem. Majority say that, khalas. What if the woman converts? Both category 1 and category 2 are going to say the marriage is null and void. She has to leave the household, and doesn't matter. There is no option. Category 3 says, hold on a sec. This is a massive impediment for people embracing the faith. They have children, the marriage is otherwise fine, and the reality of the current world we live in is different from earlier. And it is possible for a Christian husband to allow his wife to practice rituals that he doesn't agree with. It's different, it's a case-by-case basis. And there is precedence. This is the key point here. We're not just coming out of thin air, and I give this fatwa, and I've given this fatwa in specific cases in my own community where a lady converted. There is precedence. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when Islam spread so quickly, a couple in Iraq, the lady said, I want to convert. The husband said, no, I don't want to convert. And the case was brought all the way to Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. And the lady said, but I don't want to live him. He's allowing me to be Muslim. I don't want to leave him. He's a good man. I want children of my father my children. I don't want to leave him. Umar ibn al-Khattab said, khalas, let them be and let her convert. So he gave the fatwa that in this scenario, which is an atypical scenario, it's not your norm, right? In this scenario, the goals of the Sharia indicate as long as he's going to allow her to be Muslim. Now, if he were to persecute, that's a different story. But if he's going to allow her to pray and to be a Muslimah and whatnot, we say, okay, if that's the case, then khalas, and you go ahead, bismillah. We'd rather her convert, because the reality is, very few women would choose Islam and give up an entire successful marriage if we put this door for them. So the context says that, hey, there is precedence, it's multiple fatwa of the past. None of the four madhabs says this, none of them. None of the four madhabs. So both group 1 and 2 would say, no precedent that we like. And they have their interpretations of Umrah or whatnot, and they're not going to do this. But the Fiqh Council of Europe and myself and others, we give the fatwa that in this case it is allowed. It is allowed. This is wasati fiqh. Wasati fiqh means you look at the reality. I'm giving controversial examples here. Mortgage. You all know one of the biggest issues we face is mortgage. And Shaykh Qardawi was one of the first, Allah yarhamu. Brave, wallahi, you need to be a scholar or a student of knowledge to understand the bravery that is required for a shaykh to give a fatwa where his own fans are going to be against him. Believe me, I know, because I have to do this all the time in the sense, the worst critics are sometimes from within your own, astaghfirullah. And they just get so nasty. If they don't agree with one thing, khalas, you've lost. The cancel culture applies from within the worst way. And Shaykh Qardawi, Allah yarhamu, he stood his ground. 35, 40 years he stood his ground. I remember growing up as a child, subhanAllah, he would come to America in the 80s, I grew up here, you know that. So he would come to America in the conventions, right? And every year he'd get asked the same question. Ya Sheikh, mortgages, Ya Sheikh, mortgages, Ya Sheikh, mortgages. And once he got irritated, he goes, I've told you so many times, the house you live in, for you and your kids, it is halal to get a mortgage. And at the time, there was no sympathy for his fatwa. Even though the fatwa is constructed in a very logical, if you actually, as a scholar, read it, it's actually very solidly argued. Because he went into this whole issue of daruriyat and hajiyat. And he said, a house is kind of in between a haja and darura. We talked about this, right? A house is like, you can't live without a house. And of the goals of the Sharia is to protect your wealth. And the average person to spend rent for 40 years, you are literally wasting millions of dollars for your children. The Sharia is not that strict in this regard. He didn't say open up a business and get rich off of riba. He said the house you live in, the Sharia is going to make a concession for that one house. And subhanAllah, 40 years later, even many ulama in category 1 and 2 are basically saying the same thing. I don't want to mention explicitly, but the most famous fiqh council of group 2 has also 2 years ago gave a fatwa. Well, if you can't find an Islamic one and you really need to, then I guess go ahead and get a mortgage. After 40 years of refutations and haram and bid'ah and kufr and whatnot, 40 years later, okay, khalas, I guess you're okay. This is wasati fiqh. And you take into account, Allah is not requiring. Now again, it's the problem, and I've spoken about this, and for every one of these I have longer lectures. The problem when it comes to riba, when it comes to mortgage, 2 things. Number 1, people get very emotional and they can't think rationally. And number 2, people don't understand there are categories of riba. And when Allah says waging war against him, He's talking about the number 1 category. And a mortgage, if it is riba, is going to be at like number 15 or 20, lowest, very low category. It's a different type of category. And I've spoken about this in multiple lectures, you can listen to that. That ruling of Allah's la'na does not apply on that level at all, by the way. And this is something every mainstream scholar should say. That Allah's la'na, when does it apply? I'll just teach you something a little bit different here. When Allah says that riba has Allah's la'na, what is He talking about? Go look at Muwatta Imam Malik, go look at Tafsir al-Tabari, go look at other early books. That riba in which Allah's la'na and you're declaring war, that riba is when you give somebody a halal loan. Then he comes and says, oh akhi, sorry, I can't pay. Then you say, oh, okay, you can't pay? Khalas, 15% fine. That is when Allah is saying, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. You take advantage of somebody's difficult situation, and you're gonna squeeze and say, khalas, okay, you can't pay, then I'm gonna renegotiate right here and now. For every month, you're gonna have to pay 15% fine. Go read, this is exactly what Ibn Umar and others said, I'm not making this up, and I have a longer lecture, one of my library chats, you can listen to them. That is فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. As for the other types, they might be haram because they lead to that one. I'm not saying that they're permissible completely, but again, there's a deconstruction here. At times, that which is made haram because it leads to the real haram will become halal when the situation calls for it. It's not haram immediately, it's haram because it leads to it. Anyway, I want to get a technicality. Wasati fiqh says, look, the goals of the Sharia need to be taken here. You're not benefiting me by getting a mortgage. It's not some maslahah that comes to me. I am benefiting the ummah in making wealth preserved in the next generation, saving people's monies, allowing them to move to better schools, closer to the masjid, and allowing them better lives. So this is an example of wasati fiqh where we're like, it's okay if we find this fatwa in light of so many points and they deconstruct it. My point is as follows now. Now with this, inshallah, we'll conclude and we have, mashallah, 30 minutes of Q&A. 30 minutes of Q&A, okay? For you guys. A lot of you have asked, well, who do we follow then? And that question is circular. Because who are you asking? Me. What do you want me to say? What do you want me to say? I'm going to be very, very academic here. On the Day of Judgment, you have to answer yourself in front of Allah. You have to answer yourself. You can't ask me who you should follow. That is circular. If you wish to follow categories 1 or 2 or 3, inshallah you are safe. And fi kullin khair. There's good in all of them. Category 4, in my humble opinion, is problematic. And category 5 doesn't require humble opinion. They might not even be Muslim. I get there's a judgment there, I'm sorry. Okay. So the problem comes, and I understand this. Category 1 says, look at you. You just said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't you see what we're saying? 3 leads to 5 from their perspective, right? Look at you guys. That's why just stick as further away as you can. And I get it. But I just say, personally, that's being ultra cautious. And sometimes ultra cautiousness leads to some ridiculous fatwa that just don't make sense at all. And I gave you a simple example with utmost respect to that school. You're not going to give the khutbah in in English, because of what? What is the evidence for this that is explicit? Of course they have their internal, but what is the actual qala Allahu, qala Rasuluhu? What is the, it's just their interpretation, and this is what we found our forefathers in our madhab says this and whatnot. And I just find this problematic, because the one time of the week people come to listen, and you're not even going to communicate to them. I know you want to preserve the deen. I know your intentions are good. I respectfully disagree. And I can give you a gazillion other examples of this nature where I believe, and again, I'm being honest, I told you I'm paradigm 3. I am biased. This is my bias. I am paradigm 3. And I speak as somebody who was an ardent champion of paradigm 2 for over a decade of my life. Go listen to my first YouTube videos when I was a very different person. Go listen to my answers then. And I know the appeal of that paradigm. I understand it. They're good people. They're all going to enter Jannah, inshallah. They've achieved salvation. I just personally think, it's my personal bias, following a madhab is good at the individual level, but if you want the community to flourish, if you want Islam to truly thrive, well then we need to wed the text with the context. And we need to think of communities and how we're going to move forward. And I have so many examples for this. Again, you're speaking to somebody who spent, not a lifetime yet, but inshallah, spent 30 plus years in the da'wah and giving fatwa, and I have migrated from category 2 to category 3. Why did I do so? Not because I gained more knowledge of the classic tradition, because my experience in preaching and teaching, my experience with interacting with the ummah has humbled me and realized I was wrong when I was in paradigm 2. This is my opinion. I'm speaking about myself. I feel I was wrong when I was in that paradigm. I was overly strict, and an example for this is actually how my perception of Shaykh Qaradawi changed, to be honest, right? When I first began studying fiqh, honestly, my respect for Shaykh Qadhi was more verbal than intellectual. Like, yeah, okay, he's an alim, he has the right. Astaghfirullah, nobody disrespects. Yeah, everybody, but yeah, he has a fringe figure. He's watering Islam down. You know, they make fun of his book, Al-Halal wal-Haram fi Islam. They call it Al-Halal wal-Halal fi Islam. Like, there's no haram, you know? And Shaykh Qaradawi fought back at this. He goes, well then, what you're trying to say is that Islam is nothing but haram and haram. And that's what I'm fighting, that mentality. That mentality that the haram fatwa is always the correct fatwa. Where'd you get that from? When Allah says this religion is ease, when Allah says يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ, Allah wants to make things easy for you. When Allah Azza wa Jalla says وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ, Allah did not make the religion difficult. The stricter fatwa doesn't mean the more correct fatwa. If you want to open this door, wallahi, sisters and brothers, I'm not going to be too controversial here, but there are fatwas there that you guys are totally unaware of that were fairly mainstream for the bulk of the ummah. The classic issue, I don't want to get too explicit because again, it's not the time to, it's going to dig myself in. The classic issue is gender interactions. If you were to study classical fiqh, subhanallah, gender interactions and gender roles becomes highly problematic if you want to stick to early interpretations. And I say this politely, even the madhabist strands who want to stick to a madhab have had to modify gender issues for modern times. They've had to, because otherwise the world cannot sustain itself. The world has changed. And if you listen to my talks on gender, it's very different. I don't want to get into it now, but I'm very blunt in this regard. I don't criticize the past. I don't, astaghfirullah, call them misogynist and whatnot, but I do say they were people of their time and place, and they have the right to derive their rulings. But we are not obliged to follow their rulings just because they preceded us. We're not obliged to. And we have the right to rethink through and understand there is leeway for gender roles to change in Islam. Not actual gender change, guys, gender roles, okay? There is leeway for gender roles to change, for gender interactions to change. There is leeway. And even those that are very strict madhabists, they've had to do this because their own daughters don't listen to them in this regard. Their own wives wouldn't do this in their own regard. They've had to modify. So I just politely point out, if you're going to do this in these things, then be consistent and understand that's exactly what we're doing when it comes to issues of a communal nature. So bottom line, with this I conclude. Who should you follow? You have to answer that question, not me. But understand where and why these various evidences and places come from. And if you really want me to be blunt here, follow either category 1 or 3, because 2 is a bit of a circular category. It doesn't really do its job. Category 1 is at least internally consistent, and I have no problems with you being consistent in your madhab and your life, and it's good. Or you can follow category 3. Now, how do you follow category 1? Very easy. If your alim or your sheikh says, I am a Maliki, I am a Shafi'i, I am a Hanafi, that's category 1. You're following, no problem. Category 3, generally speaking, these are the councils of the world. The World Fiqh Council in Mecca is category 3. The European Fiqh Council, category 3. The Fiqh Council in North America, category 3. And the people who sit on it, including yours truly, our personal fatwa that we give detailed lectures on, generally they're emanating from category 3. So, if you want to follow either category 1 or category 3, fi kullin khair, you will find barakah and good in this. And inshallah ta'ala, these are all mainstream. And inshallah, you will achieve the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with that, we have 25 minutes for Q&A. So how are we going to do the Q&A, moderator?
I'll just ask you the question and...
How do they give it to you?
They send me the questions.
How do they send to you?
On the app.
Oh, there's an app. Okay, I had no idea. You guys are so technologically advanced. Okay, this is mashallah text and context, mashallah. Okay. Okay, khalas. So let me sit down back, inshallah. Then okay.
So there's a hadith that has become very popular among Islamophobes, especially in light of what's going on in Palestine, that at the end of times, before the Day of Judgment, that basically, I'm paraphrasing, that the Muslims will fight with
Yes,
Jews.
yes. Okay, I get it.
Can you explain?
You have to be really careful about what you say.
All right.
Okay. You don't give your enemy ammunition. There's wisdom. When you speak precisely. There's no reason to dig yourself deeper. You don't do this. We know the hadith. By the way, can you vote on the questions?
No.
Oh, because I wanted you to vote on the best question we asked this. Okay. We're in a democracy, right? Democracy is not kufr, by the way. That's another wasati thing. Democracy is not kufr. Voting doesn't make you a kafir, please. My God, like, subhanAllah. Anyway, Allah Musta'an. How do you live when you feel these views? Wallahi, how can you live in America and say democracy is kufr? How can you live in America and say you can't? So it's sometimes these fatwas are frustrating and you just need to call them out. Now, the issue of end of times, very simple. It's just like the Banu Qurayza issue. This hadith is not prescribing a legal ruling for everybody of that category. This hadith is describing what is going to happen in a particular battle. It's very simple. And so anybody who problematizes this, you tell him, hey, just don't, fight with the one-eyed devil. Simple, Dajjal. Don't be on Dajjal's side. Be on the side of truth, and that's it. And this is not a prescription of us going and doing something. It is describing an incident in the future. It's a prediction of what's going to happen because war is taking place. And because one side you have the Antichrist, Dajjal, and the other side you have Jesus Christ. And the both of them have miracles. And the both of them, of course, the one miracle is from shaitan. When I say miracle, don't misunderstand me. This is shaitanic tricks. And the other is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you cannot recognize the truth with your actual eyes on that battlefield, you have chosen literally the side of the devil. It's not a prescription to do something. It's a description of choosing the wrong side and what's going to happen. Simple as that. Oh, you have one microphone, okay.
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in several ayat about taking non-believers, or not taking them as awliya, how do we approach this ayah or understand it when there are several non-Muslims out there, such as Norman Finkelstein, for example, who have been very outspoken about the Israeli genocide? And how do we reconcile that?
So the interpretation of this verse needs to be understood in light of the seerah. In light of the seerah. When the Prophet ﷺ was boycotted by the Banu Hashim for 2 years, remember that boycott outside of Mecca where there was no food, no water? Who broke the boycott? Non-Muslim politicians. Non-Muslim politicians. And the Muslims helped in that. Is the Prophet ﷺ disobeying the ayah? When the Prophet ﷺ sent the Sahaba to Abyssinia, what did he tell them to say to Negus, to the Najashi? He said to them that the Negus, the Najashi, is a man of justice. And he will allow you to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his land. He's taking the Najashi as a protector of the Muslim community. Is he, astaghfirullah, disobeying the ayah? When the Prophet went on the hijrah, who did he hire as his guide? Abdullah ibn Abi Uqayd, who was actually a non-Muslim, a pagan. He hired as the guide, and the Quraysh had a bounty of 100 camels. And whatever the Prophet was paying him was a fraction of that. Was he disobeying? So guys, please, be careful. And this is why, how strict and blunt should I be? Be careful who you take knowledge from. That's why I know it's circular because you're speaking to somebody who's gone through it myself. But you know, when you listen to the fringe figures or when you listen to hardcore people, wallahi, it messes up your life, wallahi. As our scholars said, a little bit of knowledge is a very dangerous thing. A little bit of knowledge, when you think the world is black and white, when you think everything is haram and halal, everything is clear cut, it causes you to really live in a cognitive dissonance, in a bubble that is disconnected from reality. How can you live in a non-Muslim land and then think, I can't have a non-Muslim friend? Where'd you get this from? I know some scholars, I know exactly where you got it from, but can't you read the seerah? Can't you understand that that interpretation goes against the lived reality of the Prophet ﷺ, and it goes against basic human psychology? This group is telling you, you have to hate everybody outside of your faith. I swear to you, it is humanly impossible to walk around full of hate for random people unless you have a pathological disease in you. Is that not the case? You don't go around looking at people with scowling and spitting on people randomly. A'udhu billah. Is this what you learn from the Quran and Sunnah and the Seerah? So please, and that's why it is so important, you need to make the biggest decision of your life. Who do you take as your reference for Islam? Because that's why I'm telling you, I can't make that decision for you. Obviously I'm biased because I am one of the people on this spectrum. Obviously I'm biased, but I'm asking you to pray to Allah sincerely, make dua to Allah. Who do you take as your reference? Because taking a wrong person as your reference, it could destroy your religiosity. Astaghfirullah, it could even destroy your deen in some cases. I have met people, wallahi, I have met from across the spectrum, not just one spectrum. When they put too much trust in their sheikh, and then the sheikh falls, or the sheikh becomes, whatever, the person's Islam is destroyed. Because they were not mature enough to make the right decision of who they should follow. So be careful, Islam is above individuals. And it's your big decision about which overall philosophy and methodology you're going to follow, because it does translate into how you live, how you interact. This interpretation of the ayah, I know a mainstream movement says it. I know it because I studied with that movement. I know what they say. With utmost respect, it is an atypical interpretation. It doesn't, the rest of the world's Muslims don't interpret the Quran this way. It's a fringe interpretation. And they can only have this interpretation because they have never interacted themselves with non-Muslims. They don't. They're very isolated in their own worldview. The Quran is not telling you that you cannot take help from non-Muslims. How can the Quran tell you this when the seerah shows you you can? Do you understand this point? So then what does the Quran mean? Awliya means somebody whom you trust as an ally, and you expect that they're going to have your primary interests at heart. And so, a simple example of this is, Allah is saying, those who take your religion as an enemy, do not take them as awliya. By the way, Allah never said, don't take a kafir as a friend. That's not the interpretation. Allah said, don't take, لا تتخذوا عدوي وعدوكم أولياء. Don't take my enemy to be a false friend. Don't fall into this deceit. Now, a simple example for this is if the Prime Minister of Israel gave you some promises. Allah is saying, don't be foolish. His track record has demonstrated who he is. If Abu Jahl gave you some promises, if Fir'aun gave you some promises, this is what the ayah is talking about. As for a person whose integrity has been demonstrated, Abu Talib, we believe he was the greatest ally, but he was not a convert. There are Abu Talibs in our times. And if people like the ones whom you mentioned, who clearly are facing the wrath of their own community, but they're speaking the truth, how can we not help them and support them and benefit from them? Of course we can. So again, the correct interpretation is, those whose track records clearly show they hate Allah and His Messenger, don't be deceived by some rhetoric from them. If they just promise you whatnot, no, they'll never be your wali. Your wali, and wali here means your primary protector. Your wali will only be those who have prioritized Allah and His Messenger. That's what the ayah means. Oh, sorry, the microphone all the time, yalla.
We're going to play ping pong with this.
Okay.
In light of recent events and betrayals, how necessary is a khilafah as a means of a unified ummah, and is a bad khalifa better than no khalifa?
So I have a whole library chat on this regard, and I actually have two. One I did about pragmatics and power, and the other I did as a conversation between myself and two other people. You can find it on my YouTube channel, and I go into a lot of detail in this regard. You can listen to my thoughts there. I personally do not prioritize this area, but I'm happy for others to do so. If you feel that this area is the most important, go for it. But I believe that we are obliged to benefit the ummah in that which is tangible. And what is tangible for me is to influence you, to help my community, to preach and teach to the broader public. As for re-establishing power in some land, who am I to do that? In fact, doing so will bring great problems for me and everybody else. And I don't find this to be something that is fard ayn. But if some group of people who are qualified, who have the clout, are thinking and planning and whatnot, good for them. I'm not against that. But I don't consider this to be of the utmost priorities. And I don't view those movements that have made it a priority to be using their resources in the wisest of manners. And history shows this. And again, you asked a blunt question, I'll give you a blunt answer. There are realities that have been exposed to all of us. Even these movements, when they came to power, there were forces beyond their power. And coups took place, and they were taken out and executed. They couldn't last. Which shows us the goal is not power. The goal, power is a means to the ultimate goal. And if we have it, we utilize it. If we don't have it, in my humble opinion, it's my opinion, there's no need to prioritize it if you're not qualified to be of those. If you were the prime minister of a country, then you come to me, we'll talk. Okay. But you and me, we can't even run our local masjids without internal politics, man. Let's be honest here. You know, your MSAs have internal politics. You want to run a khilafah? I mean, come on. You know, so humble yourself down, flutter back to earth, and just concentrate on yourselves and be a good person, influence people in your own family, and inshallah you'll get to firdaus in that manner, inshallah. 5 minutes left or 10 minutes?
8:10.
8 minutes left? Okay, bismillah.
10.
Oh, 8:10. Okay, bismillah.
So you mentioned earlier, what did you mean by the statement that gender roles can change with time? Does that mean that something like qawama, for example, can be given to a woman instead of a man?
This topic cannot be answered in 2 minutes. And I'm being honest with you. And no matter what I say, it's going to be vague in this regard. Gender roles not only can change, they have changed. And all you need to do, every one of you here, go ask your own grandparents if they're alive, how they lived their lives when they were younger, and how the world was back then versus how it is now. It's just the reality of how things are. So gender roles, what exactly does a husband do in the household versus the wife? How much of the household chores does a man do? I guarantee you, and I'm sorry to be blunt, and my problem is I don't believe in political correctness. My problem is I'm too blunt and I just speak like it is, and because I don't like sugarcoating, I don't like pretending things that don't exist. SubhanAllah, why are we playing games here? We know the realities. Your grandmothers and my grandmothers, they wouldn't even allow our grandfathers to do things around the house. My own grandmother, and I don't mind saying this, my grandfather worked a hard job. He worked 12 hours, in a very menial job. He was not, Allah blessed us, we worked our way up. My grandfather would work in a factory. When he migrated to Pakistan, as they didn't have any money, he gave up everything. He literally started at rock bottom. Coming after 12 hours of sweating in a factory, you think he washed the dishes? You think he cooked food? My grandmother would literally make food, stand, fan him, and help him, eat and whatnot. Then when he finished, the rest of the wife and children would come. My grandmother's children would come. And guess what? If I work 12 hours in a factory, I want my wife to do the same thing. I can assure you, my wife does not sit fanning me at the table when I'm sitting and eating food. I wouldn't remain too long in the household if that were the case. I'm not going to brag and boast, but alhamdulillah, I've changed every one of my kids' diapers when they were growing up. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Say takbir, guys, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. My forefathers never changed any diapers. Now, which one is haram, which one is halal? It's all okay, no big deal. It's not a big deal, okay? How even in the seerah we learn, when Umar ibn Khattab came home one day, and I have more detailed lectures about this, and he was angry at his wife for some reason we don't know, we don't care about. These are internal things that happen. He raised his voice, and his wife raised her voice and responded back. And he was so shocked, he lost his train of thought completely. He forgot what he was saying. And he says, because he was accustomed to his wife not responding back. And he said, you dare respond back to me and you raise your voice? In his mind, she had crossed gender roles. And she said, you're angry at me? Go talk to your own daughter who does this to somebody better than you. Meaning, Hafsa with the Prophet. And he was now so shocked, he forgot everything at the house. And he rushed to Hafsa. This is in Sahih Bukhari. He rushed to the house of Hafsa. And he said, oh Hafsa, is this true, what your mother has told me? What did she tell you? That you dare raise your voice against the Prophet ﷺ? And at times you have an argument and you don't talk to him for the entire day, the cold, deadly, silent treatment, which every husband is aware of, right? He was not accustomed to it. And she said, if I do it, Aisha does it. And Umar al-Khattab said, even if she does it, she's a different case. And that was his point and whatnot. And he goes to the Prophet ﷺ, reminiscing of the good old days. It's Sahih Bukhari. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, don't you miss Mecca? When our women were timid and docile and they didn't respond back. Now we've come to Medina, these women of the Ansar have corrupted our women. I'm not making this up, it's in Sahih Bukhari. Like I said to you, sisters and brothers, if you don't understand these paradigms, a lot of these issues might end up affecting your iman. Once you understand the wasati paradigm, it's no big deal. Really, it's no big deal. Okay, that's the way they did things. It's okay. I don't have any, wallahi, I say this, I don't have any issues with any of these things. That's the way they dealt with it, no problem. But I don't see it binding on us. And if anybody criticized them, I would honestly say, you are intellectually shallow. You don't understand anthropology. You don't understand social history. You don't understand how customs change. I find that to be intellectually shallow. There's no reason to criticize them. Just like your own grandmothers had a different, they would balk if they saw how you modern women treat your husbands. They would say, astaghfirullah, tawbah, tawbah, astaghfirullah. They would do this. But you know what? No big deal. It is what it is. This is gender roles. Okay, no problem. And qiwama is an ethics. That's not going to change. But the manifestation of qiwama is culturally sensitive. As I explained to you, maybe 100 years ago, the notion of qiwama was the woman dare not respond back to the husband. The woman is not going to eat on the same table as the husband. The husband eats, and then when he's done, the leftovers are for the women. In their view, that's qiwama. Who does this anymore? It's not done. So qiwama is an ethics. The minutiae of how it manifests is going to be changing. Again, I can go on and on here. The household payments to household income. It's understood if you have a larger house and the woman agrees to work. It's not binding. Technically, the man has to pay the rent. But the woman's like, I don't want to live in an apartment. I want to live in a nice house. The husband's like, I can afford this. She goes, don't worry, I'll work, we'll put it together. Is that diminishing a man's qiwama? Honestly, it's up to the husband and wife. So this is a gender role change taking place. Does the Sharia criminalize the husband? How dare you take a percentage of your wife's income? No, because they both agreed to it. So I'm sorry guys, but I don't play these games here. I'm not a feminist, but I'm also not a misogynist. I'm wasati, that's the whole point, you know? It's the whole point here. I don't agree with feminism, wallahi I don't. I'm not a feminist. And I think feminism has lost the plot because the two genders are not in competition with each other. A feminist wishes to prove her worth by being a man, and I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. A woman's power is in her femininity. And wallahi, if she is truly feminine, wallahi, she is more powerful than a man, but I'm not going to go over there. Women, wallah, Allah has blessed you to control a man. Like, anyway, I don't want to go mission. Anyway, okay. I'm just teaching you some stuff, okay? So, bottom line. Gender roles have demonstrably changed. Demonstrably. And the Sharia allows for a leeway of change here. I'll say this, you know what? I'm going to say this. I'm going to get in trouble. But I want you to understand what wasati versus madhabi. You know I said there are things that are gender that are... I'll give you an example. I'm sorry to shock your sensitivities. But the fatwa to not educate women was fairly mainstream for the bulk of Islamic history. I'm sorry if your sugar-coated version of Islam taught you something else. I'm telling you facts. These are facts. Go read books of fiqh. And that's why certain modern political movements have this version. Because they find it. They're not coming out of thin air. So I'm sorry to be blunt here, but my goal is to preserve Iman and Islam for generations and not to present a sugar-coated, romanticized version of the past. Our scholars were great, but they were human. And they reflected the time and place they lived in. I don't demonize them, but I don't at the same time consider them to be infallible. They did the job they needed to do. We now have the right to take their legacy, respectfully see what can we do. Look at how all of you are sitting here as well. Men and women, mashallah, like this. This is gender roles. No Muslim civilization would have allowed this. I'm sorry again to be politically incorrect, but I'm trying to make your minds think here. The goal is after these 2 hours, your mind is going to be swirling with curiosity and wanting to study more. And then inshallah you listen to other lectures that I've given in more detail. The very fact you're sitting like this is a gender role change here. Which society in the Muslim world would allow this? That somebody comes and says, it doesn't work this way, I'm sorry. And I don't have any problem with this. If I did, I wouldn't be here. There's nothing wrong with this. We're all dressed decently, acting decently. The gender roles have changed. The way we are interacting with one another. There's nothing wrong with this. The Sharia allows for this healthy interaction. Does it mandate it? No. Which is why I don't criticize in Muslim majority countries where they have a strict segregation. That's on them. I'm a cultural relativist where the Sharia allows it. That's exactly the fourth principle of Qa'id Fiqhiyya, al-urfu muhakkam. Culture plays a role. So how genders interact with one another, how they sit in a classroom, there is an element of cultural sensitivities here. And in many cultures in the world, majority of Muslim cultures, this here would be criminalized from the Sharia perspective. They would say, astaghfirullah, how can you do this? And we have had cases in mainstream conventions of Eastern shuyukh walking in here and walking straight out of mainstream conventions. Mainstream, the largest conventions in the city. I've seen this myself. Eastern shuyukh come, they've never seen this before. Great scholars in their lands. They walk into the auditorium and after the hawqala, la hawla quwwata billah, they walk straight out. Or in one case, I'll never forget this, here in this city of another convention. They tried to placate him, so he said, okay, I'm going to sit, but I'm going to face the side as I speak to the audience. And I was there that year, this was like 15 years ago, and I was just like, I was saying, like, why would you invite this person when, with utmost respect, they're coming from paradigm one, and you just plop them in to, it's like a culture shock. They can't imagine that this is happening. So he gave that talk in this city. I was there in that convention, and he was facing the wall, right? Because he thought this is haram. So I'm sorry to be blunt here, but this is what happens when you're not willing to think a little bit reality. And that's why utmost respect to category one, but you will never find any of them truly consistent through and through. I'm sorry, this is a bit harsh, but they have to modify for reality. And all we say, if you've already done it for all of these situations, and I can tell you exactly which one they've done it in, you might as well be consistent and do it for the real world of America that we live in. That's what we do in category 3. Anyway, inshallah. Last question before all of the... Guys, please, let's not put this in public and let's just keep this, because we taught a whole class here, so at the end of these Q&A, I'm allowed to be a little bit blunt here. So please, let's not put this on. Okay, inshallah, jazakallah khair. Okay, bismillah.
So I'm going to try to bunch up these questions because a lot of them are about Palestine. So there's been a lot of growing sentiment, especially among youth, about kind of despair in this country and wanting to leave the country and go somewhere else where they can practice Islam as they see. Or just another question here is about, is my money haram if it's, so much of it, or is paying taxes haram if so much of it is going to fund Israel? And even questions like this, which I'll let you see.
Yeah. Okay. So tomorrow, Thursday, tomorrow's Thursday, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Tomorrow I have a lecture about this for the youth, I think, right? It's for the youth. When I say youth, I mean you guys, sorry. I used to be youth too once upon a time, not too long ago. I have a lecture about this, should we go or should we leave or whatnot. But in a nutshell, listen to your elders. Because your elders have gone through life more than you have. And listen to those that have lived in multiple countries. I've lived in multiple countries. I've lived in the Middle East. I've lived over here. I was born and raised here. Listen to me carefully. There is no utopia on earth. There is no Jannah on earth. And if you were to leave this country and go to another, all you will do is substitute one set of problems for another set of problems, which you are less qualified to deal with because you grew up with this set of problems. And you're going to discover that life is far more complicated than you thought it was. And generally speaking, you will come to the realization that it was easier for you to try to solve the problems of the culture you happen to be born into. Not that anyone is worse or better. As for the ethical issue of your taxes, this is actually very easily answerable. No doubt we're angry, but we're working to change it. And so don't be an apolitical, quietist observer. Raise public awareness. Do what you can. And then in your niyyah, when you pay your taxes, you do realize that, of course, we pay a lot to these foreign countries, but at the end of the day, a lot of taxes are for completely halal issues at home. We're building the roads and financing the schools and everything. So you make your niyyah, and that is the bulk of your taxes, by the way. Don't do your, I forgot the statistics, but I don't want to mention a number, but the vast majority of your taxes are completely halal, i.e. they're spent for the country and whatnot. Yes, a percentage is haram. So when you give, you say to Allah, "Oh Allah, you are my witness that my niyyah is this is going for all of the halal stuff." And you have done your job, inshallah. But then don't be quiet at the percentage that's haram. And you do your job to raise public awareness and try to lobby and change. And inshallah, and I'll give my lecture tomorrow, both my lectures tomorrow about Palestine, inshallah ta'ala, we will all be instruments and catalysts of change to minimize and inshallah eventually eliminate even 1% of our money going to that filthy apartheid haram regime. So inshallah we're all going to lobby to change that. And with that, jazakumullahu khairan, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Just going to make a short comment, and then inshallah we'll get going. Inshallah, first of all, please, everyone, brothers and sisters, enjoy the rest of the convention. You will note that security has been increased a lot more than it has in the past. Please follow the rules. Please be a model Muslim. While you are here, be among Ibad al-Rahman, be among the servants of the Muslims. Your attitude is salamat throughout the entire convention. Given that. There is on Thursday and Friday, there will be a 12:45 a.m. there will be a Quran recitation. Here in the Fulton also for the travelers as well. اللهم إني داعٍ أمين. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم يا واصل المنقطعين أوصلنا إليك. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا اغفر لنا ولوالدينا ربنا ارحمهما كما ربيانا صغارا. اللهم فرج الهم والغم والكرب عن إخواننا في فلسطين وفي غزة وفي كل مكان. اللهم كن معهم لا عليهم. اللهم اشف مرضاهم وجرحاهم. اللهم فك أسيرهم، اللهم أطعم جائعهم، اللهم أمن خائفهم، اللهم استر عوراتهم وآمن روعاتهم، اللهم تقبل شهيدهم. اللهم من أرادنا وديننا بخير فوفقه وأعنه يا الله، ومن أرادنا وديننا بغير ذلك فخذه أخذ عزيز مقتدر، واغفر لنا تقصيرنا في حقوق إخواننا، وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.